let's start, Vatkin. Let's start, Professor Vatkin. I'd like to introduce you, if I may, to
Yes.
our audience. Um,
Would you like me to introduce
welcome.
myself? That might be shorter.
I have prepared something,
All right.
and so I'd like to do it if I may.
Yes, of
Um,
course.
um, I'm recording this for a podcast for the Frontline Club, which is titled "The Psychology of the Powerful and How We Can Cope with the Chaos and How Journalists Might Better Report on It." I've known Professor Sam Vaknin for several years now, and I'm very excited that he has agreed to be interviewed today for the Frontline Club podcast. Sam Vaknin has done many things in his life. He's been a governmental advisor. He's made important academic contributions in physics. He's a writer and has worked as a journalist for many years. We share an interest in the Balkans. I feel that Sam is best known for his published works on personality disorders. In 1999, Sam published a book titled Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. The very language we use today to describe narcissism was brought to us by Professor Vaknin. Terms like narcissistic abuse and flying monkeys, to name two of them, have greatly advanced our understanding of abusive behavior. It is my view that sufferers of a domestic abuse are greatly in Sam's debt because it is out of his work that an industry has emerged to help them. It's not to say that we're anywhere near where we need to be in understanding abuse, its nature, its ubiquity, and its impact on our societies, whether in the domestic setting or on the international stage. For most of us, the extraordinary, perhaps overwhelming changes happening in the world order today are deeply distressing. Whether we like it or not, collectively, we are living through the biggest story of our lives. I feel that something is being done to us, and it makes me feel powerless and manipulated. In my trade, journalism, I see a struggle to properly explain what is going on. To do so, surely we need to better understand the psychology of the people making these changes, and perhaps of ourselves for acquiescing to them. They might endanger us. And this is why I'm speaking to Professor Sam Vaknin today. Sam, thank you very much for seeing us.
Thank you. Thank
I
you
am going to
for,
do all sorts of work on trying to put this into a podcast after this recording.
well, thank you for having me. I'm overwhelmed by your introduction. I almost
Well,
recognize myself.
Sam, we both know it's accurate,
Yes.
and I'm privileged, and I'm really hoping that we can make inroads. And I absolutely can't think of anybody who can better try to cut through this stuff and try and leave us with something that we can use in my trade. And I really think it's incredibly important. So if I may start with the questions, um, and and my first would be, Sam, what are the psychological attributes of strong men and authoritarian leaders?
Well, first of all, one should not conflate the two. One can be a strong man and still adhere to democratic tenets and to consensus building and to teamwork and so on. Authoritarian leaders, on the other hand, autocrats and dictators, definitely, and so on, pretend to be strong men. It's a performative act. And they pretend to be strong men by excluding others contemptuously. And so there should be a major distinction between the two types. We can have strong men in utterly functional democracies, and that's not necessarily a bad thing from time to time. Right the course, you know. But authoritarian leaders, autocrats and dictators are always bad for your health, exactly like cigarettes. Now, the psychological features or clinical features of people who end up being dictators and autocrats and so on and so forth are numerous. And what I will try to keep it to a kind of headline style of reviewing, bullet point style of reviewing everything. And then if you wish to expand or expound on any of these, then I'm at your disposal. Number one, the authoritarian leader believes himself to be chosen. He has what we colloquially call a messiah complex. He suffers from the delusion of being a rescuer, a savior, a fixer, a healer. In short, he regards the world as a dystopian place, and he regards his own governance and his own period in power as the reification of a utopia. So all autocratic leaders are utopian. That's point number one. Point number two, rebelliousness is an integral part of being an authoritarian leader. Authoritarian leaders are not about creating a new establishment or a new nomenclature or a new power structure. They are very short-term thinkers. They don't do succession well. They don't do institutions well. What they do is a constant state of revolution. So it's a permanent revolution. Number three, autocratic leaders hold themselves to be visionaries, disruptors, because they believe they're possessed of superhuman knowledge, knowledge that is either supernatural, came from God, or his emissaries, or knowledge that is simply superhuman by virtue of their amazing genius, unprecedented genius. But at any rate, they have access to information and the capacity to process information that is denied to mere mortals. And that renders them visionaries, and that gives them the right to disrupt and to destroy, because they see much further than you, and they can tell the future, which you are barred from doing. They can definitely do that. And of course, this all leads to an emanation of self-confidence. Charisma is essentially another name for ostentatious self-confidence, coupled with firm conviction of infallibility. I never get things wrong. I can never fail. I have all the knowledge in the world. I'm omnipotent. I'm omniscient. In short, it's an apotheosis. It's a kind of self-divination, self-deification. The autocrat regards himself as a kind of mini God, or not so mini, in many cases, God. And of course, entitled to behave in ways which are reprehensible in mere mortals, in other humans, in his fellow men, because he is not exactly human. He is a Hercules. He is half human and half God, or maybe the proportion is even different. So autocratic leaders are therefore grandiose, and their grandiosity gives them the right to espouse and promulgate a special type of morality. So they are Nietzsche's supermen. They create a moral sphere, an ethical code that applies first and foremost to others, but comes from the autocrat. He is the source of the law. Autocrats regard themselves as hyper-moral and pro-social. They think that actually everyone else is evil and wicked or weak or stupid or something, and therefore everyone else is a threat to humanity at large. It's been said that autocrats, authoritarian leaders, love humanity but hate people. So it's very true. The autocratic leader believes that there's some kind of mystical connection between himself and the collective. The collective may be a nation state, maybe a church, maybe whatever, but there's always a mystical connection. It's a connection that is transcendental and usually is cloaked in religious garb, in religious language. It's highly religious. So, because the autocratic leader perceives himself as highly unique, unprecedented, he's unable to relate to other people. So he's devoid of empathy. He's devoid of empathy, and he's solipsistic. His reality testing is impaired. He's divorced from reality. He's delusional. But I think a common mistake that is made even in literature is that this solipsism, this delusionality, this disempathy is not the outcome necessarily of pathological narcissism or psychopathy, but it's the outcome of a narrative that places the autocratic leader in the vanguard of a new species. So he's like the next stage in evolution. He's taking people to Mars. He's no longer with us on this planet. He's divorced from us. He has divorced us, and he's creating his own tribe. And consequently, of course, he's unable to relate to us. The same way you as a human being can't really relate to the internal world of a dog or a cat. It would be difficult. No matter how endowed you are and how much effort you put into it, you're very likely to fail. You're bound to fail, actually. Because the autocratic leader sets himself or herself apart, it's mostly himself, by the way. The vast majority of authoritarian and autocratic leaders throughout history have been men. That may change or may be changing now with, feminism and so on. And we did have already a few examples of authoritarian or autocratic women leaders, most recently in Bangladesh and, India, Pakistan, you name it. And so the autocratic leader, having set himself apart from humanity, so I would even say in contradistinction to humanity, like I as a leader I am everything a typical human being is not. I am everything a human being is not. I am much more intelligent. I am much more powerful. I am much more of everything, and quantity becomes quality. I'm qualitatively different as an autocratic leader from the led. I am not the same. The common denominator is very small and perhaps only biological. So having put himself, pedestalized himself, having idolized himself, this creates a lot of paranoia because the autocratic leader is aware that such self-elevation may generate or engender resentment and bitterness and envy, especially envy, and even anger and so on. So the more the autocratic leader deifies himself, idolizes himself, the more paranoid he becomes because he realizes the backlash is inevitable. It's a matter of time. So people like that develop what we call referential ideation. Referential ideation is when they believe that everyone is criticizing them, hates them, mocks them. Everyone is mocking them. Everyone is hating on them, and so on and so forth. They become very, very defensive, and they externalize aggression. They become more and more and more aggressive because they attribute or actually misattribute to other people hatred, their own emotions. They project, they attribute to other people the hatred that they feel, the envy that preoccupies them, the rage that is driving them. They attribute all these to other people, and then the environment becomes a hostile, dangerous place. So referential ideation leads to hypervigilance, the constant monitoring, constant scanning of the environment for imminent risks, imminent attacks, and so on. Frustration leads to aggression and paranoia. All of them end up being paranoid. It's a question of time. To cope with all this turmoil, increasing inner tumult, what the leader does, he uses what we call infantile defense mechanisms. I mentioned projection. I might as well mention splitting. Splitting is when the leader says, I'm all good, everyone else is all bad. Splitting is black and white thinking. It's also known as dichotomous thinking. There's a dichotomy. I'm all good, I'm all moral, I'm all superior, I'm all intelligent, I'm all knowing, I'm all, and everyone else, even my closest, nearest, dearest kin, assistants, supporters, acolytes, sycophants, fans, followers, they're all inferior to me and inferior by negation. They're everything I'm not. So I'm all good, they're all bad. They conspire against me If they could, they would have taken me down. They would have taken me down. There's a lot of paranoia there. And so splitting is another example of primitive defense mechanism. Ultimately, if I had to summarize, which I know, to cut a long story short is a bit too late, but if I were to put it in a nutshell, if I were to summarize, I would say that the autocratic leader is an inverted human being. And I'll explain what I mean.
Mm.
While normal, relatively healthy, functional people have a conscious and an unconscious. And the unconscious is a cesspool, honestly speaking. It contains all the repressed urges and drives, socially unacceptable behaviors, thoughts that are highly unpleasant or uncomfortable, ego dystonic. Everything is buried there. It's a huge garbage dump of anything and everything that you could not allow yourself to accept or to realize or to get in touch with emotionally and psychologically. So in a typical human being, you have the conscious state, which is public facing, which is socially condoned usually, which is conformist, which plays by the rules and so on and so forth. And you have the unconscious, where you are essentially a wild beast. In the autocratic leader, the unconscious is the autocratic leader's conscious state. The urges of the autocratic leader, the drives, the primitive drives of the autocratic leader's fantasies, including fantasies of extreme aggression, the autocratic leader's wishes, including socially frowned upon and unacceptable and unpalatable wishes, all these constitute the autocratic leader's conscious, not unconscious. Whereas in a normal human being, all these would be unconscious. In an autocratic leader, they are conscious. And because the autocratic leader exhibitionistically and ostentatiously displays his unconscious and legitimizes his unconscious, that is the source of his power. That is the source of his attraction, magnetism, and charisma, because the autocratic leader legitimizes the unconscious in each and every one of us. This is misperceived by people as liberation, as a kind of unshackling. Now they can give voice and expression to the hiddenmost urges and drives and wishes and fantasies, even fantasies and wishes and drives and urges that involve hurting and harming other people, either individually or as collectives. So this legitimization of the unconscious is the true source of energy and power of the autocratic leader. And of course, we have examples throughout history. I think Hitler is the number one, the most quintessential example, but Donald Trump is not far in this sense, and so on. This is more or less an overview of the psychology.
Oh, thank you. Now, you said that autocratic leaders are not necessarily personality disordered, but you have described flaws that could well be narcissistic or psychopathic, yes?
Probably because we have no access to these people. They rarely attend therapy. They would never subject themselves to any medical diagnostic procedures. But probably the overwhelming vast majority of these people are psychopathic narcissists, malignant, or what Otto Kernberg calls malignant narcissists. Malignant narcissism is a combination of clinical narcissism, clinical psychopathy, and clinical sadism. Whereas dark personalities, such as dark triad personalities, are subclinical. So dark triad personalities are much more common than clinical personalities, luckily for all of us. And dark triad personalities are simply, to be honest, a-holes. That's what they are. They're a bit Machiavellian, they're a bit psychopathic and defiant and a bit narcissistic and self-interested, and they're a bit of everything, but they don't amount to the disorders. Whereas these leaders that I've just described, whose psychology I've just described, definitely, in my view, could be diagnosed one and all with malignant, at the very minimum, malignant narcissism, and possibly with outright psychopathy. You know.
Mm. Um, do autocrats, are they inclined to surround themselves with similarly dysfunctional people? I mean, if we use, the current US administration, there's been a lot of concern about some of the president's selection of his people, his team. Um, do these people collectivize?
Well, someone with this personality profile would tend to surround himself with two types of people, basically.
Mm,
Like-minded people,
mm,
um, and these people could be like-minded because they are submissive or opportunistic, or both, typically both. Submissive people are opportunistic. Submissive people control from the bottom. Submissive people use their neediness and dependency and clinging in order to manipulate other people.
mm,
And so there's many submissive people and very few um, not mirror images, actually, reflections of the autocratic leader. So autocratic leaders would tend to flock together. They would tend to aggregate. They would tend to collaborate. They would tend to cross-adulate. They would adulate each other. They would tend to enhance each other, and by enhancing each other, self-enhance. This is a process known as co-idealization. I'll discuss it later if we come to it. And so, and the reason for this is double. First of all, predators in nature tend to collaborate in order to prey on the vulnerable and on the weak. It's just a fact of nature. It's almost biological. But I think there's another reason. Deep inside, these people suspect that they're completely bonkers. They suspect that they're insane. And they need other people to tell them that they're not. And so if Trump suspects deep inside when he's all alone in his bathroom, he says to himself, "Oh my God, I'm a serious nutcase. Luckily, no one realizes." But the minute after he talks to Putin, he feels good because they are both identical, they are twins. And so then I'm not alone. And I'm not alone means I'm normal. Statistically, even, normalcy is a statistical yardstick. So if there are many of me, if there are many clones of me, that means I'm okay. Nothing's wrong with me. There is this need for normalcy. And Harvey Cleckley, the famous theoretician of psychopathy, called it in the 1940s the mask of sanity. These people need to put on a mask of sanity, and it helps if there are other people who are very much like them and help them to sustain the delusion, the self-delusion, self-deception that they're normal, nothing's wrong with them. So at that point, there is a mechanism called alloplastic defense. The minute you tell yourself, nothing's wrong with me, but people keep telling me that something's wrong with me, so that proves that something is wrong with them. I mean, by now I have established, having spoken to Vladimir Putin, I've established that nothing's wrong with me. So all these libtards and others who keep telling me that I'm crazy or narcissist or whatever, something is wrong with them. And that is known as an alloplastic defense. So it also is also helpful. This confluence of like-minded autocratic leaders is also, this club actually, is also helpful in creating the ability to project and blame others for everything that's wrong and so on, to scapegoat basically other people. It fulfills
So,
many
so,
functions.
so in effect, a state administration or a state's collective leadership could be pathologically narcissistic or corruptly autocratic. What I'm quite keen to understand is whether there's a cyclical dynamic between these types of administrations. You've mentioned Hitler's Germany. Um, is there something happening? And it leads me on to the next question, really, about perhaps there's a pattern happening here that perhaps we really should understand. But um, it's about the psychological dynamics involved in the relationship between this charismatic autocrat and his administration and his base, and whether it has a repeating nature that we should be careful of.
Yes, the relationship between an autocratic leader and the collective that he leads, he or she leads, well, it's a he in most cases, leads, this relationship is utterly deterministic. It's predetermined. It's like predestination, Calvinistic predestination. There's nothing the leader can do about it. Exactly like the shared fantasy in the interpersonal relationships of narcissists. The shared fantasy is inexorable. It has a power of its own and it overpowers the narcissist. That's why Freud called it repetition compulsion. It's a compulsion. The relationship between the authoritarian leader and the led people, the nation state or the church or a corporation, by the way. You could have an authoritarian autocratic leader as a chief executive officer. I mean, ask any of Elon Musk's employees. So in all these settings where there is a collective and a leader of this type, there is an inexorable cycle. And a cycle has several stages. They're all well defined. They all follow each other deterministically. There's absolutely nothing the leader or the led can do about it. It starts with what is known as co-idealization. Co-idealization is when the purported leader, the person who wants to become such a leader, it's an early stage. It's a love bombing stage where the leader love bombs his base, his electorate, the voters, the citizens, the denizens of a place, the citizens of a nation, the employees in a company. There's a love bombing phase. During the love bombing phase, the leader idealizes his would-be flock or followers or acolytes or students, or he idealizes them. He tells them not only nothing is wrong with you, but everything is right with you. You can do no wrong. You're perfection reified. You're wonderful. You're amazing. You are the culmination and the apex of human evolution. You are an example to follow. Exceptionalism, yes, American exceptionalism. You're an example to follow, and so on. So the leader idealizes his potential voters or supporters or whatever, and they in turn idealize the leader. They say the leader is a genius. The leader is amazingly cunning. The leader is stunningly accomplished. The leader is, and the leader is. So there is dual idealization, and this is known as co-idealization. That's stage number one. Stage number two involves othering, alterity. It's when the leader says, you, my base, you're perfect. And you're perfect largely because I'm perfect. It is my perfection imbues you with perfection. My perfection radiates on you and renders you perfect. Okay, but only you and I are perfect. Everyone else is imperfect and probably malevolently so. Everyone else is a threat. Everyone else is a risk. So there is this figure of the other. And the other is not so much a human figure. It's more of a set of abstract principles. So the other could be the Jews, could be immigrants, could be blacks, could be women, could be the other always embodies and reifies a set of abstract principles and abstract traits and behaviors. For example, the other may be lazy and prone to criminality, or the other might be greedy and antisocial, or the other may be bitchy and manipulative. And so there's this other. The other, of course, becomes not only the enemy, but an identity determinant, because you define yourself as not being the other. So if you're a follower of this kind of leader, you define yourself as a follower of a leader, but at the same time, you also define yourself as not the other. Like if you're a white supremacist, you follow a leader and you follow the ideology and you identify with the ideology, and it constitutes a determinant and integral part of your identity. But you're also not black. A part of your identity is not being black. So we call this negative identity formation. The next stage is victimhood. The famous sociologist Bradley Campbell suggested that we have transitioned from the age of dignity to the age of victimhood. Everyone and his dog is a victim. There's a serious shortage of abusers because everyone is a victim, and now everyone is looking for abusers. It's the scarcest rare earth resource there is. So the minute you define yourself in contradistinction to the other becomes a threat, or at the very least, a potential threat. At that point, you're a victim, or at the very least, a potential victim. If things go out of hand or get out of hand, you will be victimized. So it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and people adopt a victimhood mentality. All the major autocratic regimes, authoritarian regimes in human history were victimhood movements. Nazism was a victimhood movement, of course. Germany has been victimized in the Versailles Treaty and so on. Donald Trump's movement, Trumpism, is a victimhood movement. The white male population has been victimized and abandoned and neglected in globalization and so on. You can't find, actually, even if you try very hard, you cannot find a single exception. All authoritarian movements are victimhood movements. So then everyone acquires a victimhood mentality, and victimhood mentality induces in people a sense of urgency. Because if you're a victim, there's paranoia, paranoid ideation, and if you don't emerge from this state of victimhood, you're likely to go extinct. So there is a sense of extinction, imminent extinction, Armageddon. When Donald Trump talks to his base, he keeps saying that the United States is ruined and destroyed and has been betrayed, and so on and so forth. And, if nothing's done about it, there'll be no United States. Similarly, he's telling Zelensky that if Zelensky doesn't hurry, there will be no Ukraine. The moment of urgency and imminent or immanent even extinction is a critical feature of authoritarian regimes. It serves to motivate the base or the followers or the believers, if you wish. It's a religion on the one hand. So it's a doomsday cult. Authoritarian regimes are death cults. They're doomsday cults, essentially. And then, of course, if you're about to go extinct, and this might happen any moment now, there's a sense of emergency or urgency, and you're a victim and so on, you would need to sacrifice. In order to emerge from this highly threatening state, a sacrifice is called for. So all these regimes are sacrificial. They couple sacrifice with hope. It's as if the message is, you're a victim. You're about to be exterminated and annihilated and eradicated and obliterated. Now, the only way to get out of this situation is for you to make sacrifices. The first sacrifice, of course, is you have to suspend your disbelief. You have to suspend your critical judgment. And you have to suspend your identity. This is the first sacrifice. But additional sacrifices are called for, including perhaps your life. So sacrifices are called for, but if you were to sacrifice, there's hope. Like hope is coupled with sacrifice in a totally fantastic narrative, in a paracosm. Now, during the Middle Ages, there was something called the morality play. The morality play involved an evil, wicked entity, usually the devil, and a totally good entity. And they would clash cosmically, if you wish, and then the good entity would win. That's a morality play. All authoritarian regimes are founded on a morality play. The authoritarian leader is the embodiment and reification of good. He is fighting evil, wicked forces, and he's calling on everyone to sacrifice in this holy war, jihad. It's a jihad. So he's calling on everyone to sacrifice because only then there is hope. I mentioned that the first sacrifice is self-suspension. You are not allowed to think critically. You're not allowed to have your own opinions. You're not allowed to deviate. Conformity is the rule of the day, and so on and so forth. There is a resonance between the psychopathologies of the leader and the psychopathologies of the population. Authoritarian autocratic leaders don't rise just like that. They cannot and never do impose themselves on a population that is otherwise inclined. That's nonsense. They absolutely reflect the population, are driven by the populace. They are the culmination and reification of the electorate. They are the people, and they hold themselves to be the people. So when you see Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler is because the vast majority of Germans were Nazis. And when you see Vladimir Putin, it's because 80+% of Russians love him to death, to this very day. And if you see Donald Trump, it's because Americans have always been Donald Trump. Having been exposed to Europe for a while, they convince a small minority, a small elite, convinced itself that Americans can become civilized. They cannot. We can discuss the foundation of America, and I can tell you a few things how I see it, but I think Trump is the real American, not Barack Obama. It is Donald Trump who is the quintessence of the United States, in my view, having lived there as well. I lived in Russia, I lived in the States, I've lived in 15 countries. I have first-hand experience of all this. And finally, the autocratic or authoritarian leader is about destruction, never ever about construction. Construction, building something, long-term establishment, institutions, they're boring. They are impersonal. They're imperfect. They are prone to corruption. And so building something is pedestrian. It's humdrum. It's boring. However, destroying something is great fun. In short, autocratic leaders are highly entertaining. They're entertainment figures. Even Adolf Hitler was a highly entertaining figure. He was the first to make use of technology such as a microphone or the airplane or television or radio, because he was basically a prime rate entertainer. So they're all entertainers, and they're entertainers who break things, who destroy things spectacularly, ostentatiously, visibly. And the first thing they destroy is the previous elites. So they're anti-elitist and anti-intellectual and anti-learning and anti-institutions. They're defined by negation, never positively. They never build anything. If you look at people like Adolf Hitler or even people like Joseph Stalin and Mao and so on and so forth, people say Joseph Stalin, he's the father of Soviet industry and the Soviet space program and Soviet nuclear weapons. All these would have happened without Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin probably has retarded all these processes by decades. Similarly, when people say, but look at Elon Musk, SpaceX and Tesla, all these would have happened much faster and much better without Elon Musk. Just read the biography by Isaacson. His interference has delayed things, has destroyed. He's a destroyer. He's not a builder. And so these are critical features of, and then, so this is the first stage. The second stage is when people wake up. They wake up usually because their interests are compromised. Poor people who voted for Donald Trump are going to find that their Medicaid benefits are cut. They're going to be very pissed off.
Mm.
They're going to begin to hate Trump. They're going to begin to protest. At that point, the autocratic leader perceives it as betrayal. Initially, the autocratic leader tries to explain the betrayal in an alloplastic way. He says, people are betraying me because they're being misled by foreign forces, by foreign intervention. Or he says, people are betraying me because they've been corrupted by some other politicians, which I need to put in concentration camps, hopefully, and so on. So but then at some point, reality intrudes, and there's no way to deny it anymore, at which point he splits and he says, I'm all good, the people are all bad, and I want them all dead, which is exactly what happened with Mao, with Joseph Stalin, with Adolf Hitler, and will absolutely happen with Donald Trump. I've not beginning the slightest of a doubt. At some point, the people become the enemy because they fail to see the fantastic uniqueness and the mystical cosmic significance of the leader, because they rebel, because they protest, because they suddenly reacquire critical thinking, because they disagree with the leader. At that point, they become the enemy. The leader becomes super hostile and does not hesitate to try to kill, millions and tens of millions, if necessary. Mao's Cultural Revolution is a perfect example of that. When he developed the paranoid delusion that the Communist Party that he has helped to establish has turned against him. So what he did, he recruited 19 and 20 years old college students. Does it sound familiar? And he used these college students to subdue and kill smug intellectuals and bureaucrats. Very reminiscent of Doge, Elon Musk's Doge. Elon Musk's Doge is a reiteration or an iteration of the Cultural Revolution, Mao's Cultural Revolution. It ends super badly because the leader always comes to regard the people as truculent, rebellious, hateful, wicked, evil, and in need of eradication. Hitler's final wish was to destroy Germany. On the 30th of April, he made his will, his final will, and he gave instructions to destroy all the infrastructure of Germany and kill as many Germans as possible. They've let him down.
Yes, I mean, I'm rather stark. Is there anything else that you can tell us about how things are likely to unfold? I mean, you've said before that these sort of people invariably end in failure, that they don't necessarily contain the ability to succeed, and ultimately things fail. Is that something we can be hopeful about, or will we suffer for that failure? It sounds like we're going to suffer for that failure.
I think a critical lacuna, a critical misunderstanding, even in scholarly literature, is that the ethos of the autocratic leader is about destroying himself and everyone around him and the people at large, and the world, if possible, and the planet. It's, as I said, a death cult. The culmination of the autocratic regime, the epitome, the apotheosis, the best thing that can happen to an autocratic leader is the twilight of the gods, the Götterdämmerung. It's the best thing that can happen. Like going out in a burst of destructive flame with everyone dead, everything destroyed, a wasteland left behind. It's like, if I can't live forever, then no one should live after me. So the twilight of the gods coupled with the betrayal drama, I've been betrayed, is the reason, is the raison d'etre, is the reason for the for the autocratic regime. It is the narrative that drives it forward inexorably. Autocratic regime is a religion. It has a mythology. It has hagiography. Already Donald Trump is being compared to the second coming of Jesus Christ. I'm kidding you not.
Oh
It has
yeah.
hagiography, mythology, personal mythology of the leader. It has temples. It has rites and rituals. It's a religion. It's a full-fledged religion. But it is a religion that is evil by choice, decadent, nihilistic, and it is performative. It's a smoke and mirrors thing. It's a spectacle, what Guy Debord called the spectacle. It's a spectacle. It's a theater. It's political theater. It's performative. And so there is a plot, there is a script, there is a narrative, a storyline. And the storyline always ends in this giant devastation, kind of a mushroom, atomic mushroom, if you wish, of like everyone goes out in flames, led again by the autocratic leader. So, as to your question, it's not so much a failure. The autocratic leader drives everything to this point. Autocratic leaders during their reign, they amass fortunes, they bask in the celebrity, but all the time they conspire and they act to undermine and destroy everything, themselves included. This is where it's all going. This is the crux and the gist and the justification of this theater production. This is the story, you know? And so it's not so much that they're incapable of building and constructing and so on. It's that destruction is so much more melodramatic, so much more impressive, guarantees a place in history, attention, and justifies or somehow sustains or buttresses the leader's feeling or sense of being a victim, an inevitable, ineluctable victim of betrayal. These kind of leaders have been betrayed from early childhood. They know to do only betrayal. There was a famous British pediatrician turned psychoanalyst. His name was Donald Winnicott. And Donald Winnicott studied children who have been exposed to early childhood abuse and trauma. And he found something so shocking that his findings, his studies, have been repressed for quite a while, until the 70s actually. He found that children who have grown up in abusive, traumatic environments love to be hated. They absolutely reject and abhor any display of love and intimacy. They flourish and thrive when they're hated, when they're feared, when they're abused, when they're re-traumatized. They flourish. They love it. They seek it. And this is exactly the psychology, the toddler psychology of the autocratic leader. This leader flourishes and thrives when he is under attack, when he is hated, when he is feared, when everyone is trying to destroy him, when he's truly being victimized, then he feels in his element. This is his comfort zone. He doesn't know what to do with love or intimacy or long-term thinking or building something or creating institution. He doesn't know what to do in any of this. And so I think the inexorability of autocratic regimes, the deterministic fatalism, is a major part of their attraction. People are attracted to autocratic regime because they have become self-destructive. There is a sense like life has become too much. Let's destroy absolutely everything and let's find the right agent to do that. So you see people in the United States celebrating the destruction of USAID, literally celebrating, and egging Elon Musk on, go and destroy even more, go demolish, devastate. There is this sense that we're at a dead end things are really bad. Reality is totally unpalatable. There's no way out. There's no hope. And so we best, get it over with. Let the other shoe drop. Let's ruin everything. Let's just ruin everything, ourselves included. That's a way
mm,
out as well. So, and then people like Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler and Mao and Viktor Orban and Erdogan and Netanyahu and these people come along and they play to this element, this overwhelming sensation of hopelessness and helplessness. And they say, you know what? You may be hopeless in building things. You may be helpless when it comes to coping with reality, but you are omnipotent when it comes to destruction. Anyone can destroy. Any child can destroy. Any child can push the nuclear button, Destruction is easy. Destruction is the great equalizer. When you destroy, you feel powerful. You feel in charge. You feel in control. You feel that you are your own master when you destroy. When you build, the chance of failure is much higher. You have to collaborate with other people. It's a much longer process. Results are not guaranteed, and so on. So when people feel helpless and hopeless, they default to destruction because destruction restores, ironically, their sense of potency, control, and power. They are empowered by destruction.
wow. Sam, this is a extremely comprehensive and a lot to digest. Sounds to me that we're living in the era of a Nero or Caligula. Um, I want to move on to what we might do about it. And quite specifically, how should journalists, reporters, and analysts cover such leaders and these arguably, but perhaps not unprecedented events?
We're faced with, I'm saying we because I used to be a journalist for 20 years and
Yes, I know.
editor for another 10 and editor in
Mm,
chief for 15 years. So,
mm,
and on multiple media, online and offline. So
mm,
I'm well acquainted with the dilemmas of covering events and so on.
mm.
And so now I'm speaking as a journalist, not as a professor of psychology. So um, we're faced with a major problem right now. The first time in 250 years, or first time in 300 years, actually, we are not believed, we're disbelieved.
Mm.
We have what is called a credibility deficit. And we all suffer from what is known in the philosophy of psychology as epistemic injustice or epistemic injury. In other words, we know that we know, we are trying to communicate the truth, but we are shunned and disbelieved and hated and rejected. And this is injurious. It's an injurious profession nowadays, especially if you work in the mainstream media. Now, I don't consider podcasters and the like to be journalists. As you well know, to be a journalist requires discipline. It's a
Mm,
rigorous profession. It's highly algorithmic. You have to go through steps and stages, and you have to be vetted multiple times by peers and superiors. It's difficult job. And yet, we are disbelieved. I mean, we're disbelieved. So everything and anything we do I perceive it as a bit futile. We are becoming solipsistic in effect. We're talking to ourselves. Like I may see a photo that you have taken, it would move me, and so on. You may read a column that I've written and similarly be moved, but it's very unlikely to exit our circle. It's very unlikely to influence a farmer in Idaho or a Russian nationalist in Moscow. Very unlikely. And so the first thing is how to take back, how to reestablish our credibility. And I think to a large extent we're at fault. I think the media have been politicized. I'm an avid reader of the New York Times, for example.
mm,
But I know that even I have reached the conclusion that it is seriously biased. I know not to resort to the New York Times when I want real information about Israel.
Mm.
And don't misunderstand, I'm a critic of Israel. I think
Yeah.
horrendous war crimes have been committed in Gaza and elsewhere, and so on and so forth. It's not that I disagree with the view of the New York Times, but I can immediately spot the bias
Mm.
and the um, malpractice, in effect.
Mm.
So we are disbelieved because we've misbehaved and we've divided ourselves. Fox News is right wing, New York Times is left wing, and you're extremely unlikely to find opposing views on either of them, and so on. So I think the first thing is we need to decide whether we are conflictive or submissive. If we are collectively, if we are conflictive, if the ethos is an ethos of conflict, then we need to collaborate with networks of whistleblowers, grassroots investigators, which we tended to shun and hold in contempt erroneously. We need, in other words, to begin to work grassroots up. Right now, we are top down. We are like the representatives of the intellectual elite. We are filters, we're membranes. It's a wrong attitude. It's not going to work anymore because we are totally disbelieved. MSM is like dead. And so what we need to do, we need to start from scratch, from zero. We need to begin to collaborate with networks of regional and local wannabe investigative journalists. We need to work with whistleblowers, much more so than we do. We need actually to become the hub of whistleblowing. So we need to start a revolution which is grassroots, eschewing and forsaking our elitist kind of stature or posture, which has led us nowhere except to alienate our readership and viewership and, you know. So this is the conflictive posture. The other option is to be submissive. Collectively submissive, that means we work only with insiders. We purvey and disseminate the official version. We collude and collaborate with narratives that are, you know, and some media have decided to do that. Fox News, that I mentioned, Fox News, yeah. And New York Times when Obama was in power. So that's the first critical decision. If we are conflictive, we start from scratch. We create networks, grassroots networks, whistleblowers, and we start from zero. And we leverage all the digital media at our disposal. We become, if you wish, glorified podcasters with a lot more discipline and professionalism. So that's option number one. Option number two is that we kowtow and we bend the knee and we collaborate with and that will give us a lease on life, of course. So you collaborate with the regime funnels advertising and everything to you.
Mm.
One of the main instruments of autocratic regimes is advertising. Advertising budgets of governments are huge. And in a small media market, it means life or death. So if the government cuts you off from, for example, from auctions or tenders, public tenders, advertising for public tenders and so on, you're dead as a medium. So in small media markets, I think only a submissive posture is possible. Because also corporations in small media markets are afraid to advertise in opposition papers and opposition television networks. You're seeing this in the United States, which is a giant media market, where corporations are terrified of Donald Trump. The latest example is Facebook.
Mm.
So you need to make this choice. The second thing is, I think we have been confusing, all of us, mea culpa, all of us have been confusing for a very long time neutrality with objectivity. It's absolutely possible to be non-neutral, opinionated. It's absolutely possible to support certain values and value systems and yet be objective. It is possible, absolutely possible. And And I'm not talking about gonzo journalism.
Mm.
I'm not talking about a mixture of fiction and non-fiction, your own personal biography. I'm talking about you could visibly and clearly make make it known where you stand on certain issues, and yet acquire a reputation for objective reporting.
Mm.
Regrettably, what has happened in the media, especially the Western media, is that they started off by not being neutral, by exerting value judgments, and then they felt the need to reframe news stories and so on and so forth, so as to support their point of view. So it became a point of view journalism. Just seriously bad, because it's polemic, it's politicized, it's wrong, it's not journalism. I haven't seen journalism for a long time now, by the way. And that includes the likes
Mm.
of The Economist and so on. I haven't seen journalism. BBC, I mean, don't get me started. Don't get me started. We don't see we haven't seen journalism, I think, since at the very least the late 1990s. And in a world that is polarized and politicized, and everyone, and very, very belligerent, and so on and so forth, there is a natural tendency to find shelter and sanctuary among your like-minded readers or viewers. It feels more safe, kind of more safe, you know? And also there's the fear of losing everyone. Like if you're objective, you're going to lose the right, you're going to lose the left. There's been no one, so, but it's not true in my view. In my view, if you're neutral, if you're objective, and even if you're non-neutral, this would represent value, added value. People will gravitate towards something like that. Neutrality is immoral. For example, had you been neutral in Nazi Germany, that would not have been an objective position. That would have been immoral. Similarly, I consider it to be highly immoral to be neutral about Donald Trump. A
Mm.
highly immoral stance. You have to choose the truth at all times, but when you choose the truth, it means you're wedded. You are wedded to it. Wherever the evidence leads, even if you don't like where it leads, you're wedded to it. If I may give you an example, we still have a few, 2, 3 minutes. I'm going on interviews here, there, and so the last interview I've given on television a few days ago ended in a fracas. There was a big fight with the interviewer. I left the studio, don't ask. And the reason was this. They know that I'm an opponent of Trump. Actually,
Mm.
possibly the earliest ever. I granted an interview to American Thinker, which is a conservative website, in March 2016. It was before Donald Trump announced that he's running to be president. Before. And I said, this guy is a narcissist. He's dangerous, and he's going to win the elections. It's a matter of public record, by the way. So I'm the prototypical anti-Trump. So everyone knows I'm against Donald Trump. So they brought me to the studio and they asked, what do you think about what he's doing with Ukraine? I said, I think it's very clever.
Mm.
I think it's a brilliant move as far as realpolitik. Because Russia is a natural ally of the United States against China. Russia and China are historical enemies.
Mm.
They're historical enemies. What are they doing here together? The United States has pushed them together. BRICS is an invention of the United States, So I think it's brilliant. What he's doing is putting a wedge between China and Russia. He's seducing Russia away from China. And yes, he's sacrificing Ukraine and possibly Europe.
Mm.
It's a new balance of power, spheres of influence, 19th century approach to geopolitics. But stupid it is not. You may disagree, you may agree, but stupid it is not. Objectively speaking, was exactly the vision of Kissinger, who was far from stupid, you know? And all hell broke loose. How did I dare to say something positive about Donald Trump? You know, and this is what I mean. I am not neutral. Donald Trump is a menace. Donald Trump is horrible. I see equivalences between Donald Trump and Hitler
Mm.
too numerous to count. And I think he should be taken down by almost all means possible. There's no neutrality here, but I attempt to be objective. And what he is doing with Ukraine can be perceived as a masterstroke. Actually,
Mm.
Kissinger would have egged him on, would have said, "You're great. It's great what you're doing." You know, that's an
So
example.
no, I see that, and I agree with you entirely about it is a masterstroke to attempt and change the relationship between Russia and China. I appreciate that. Obviously it's pretty uncomfortable to Europeans, and even more so to Ukrainians. But um, I wanted to end, if I may, on what can we do, people, those Europeans, those Ukrainians, how do we weather this? How do we perhaps psychologically manage our way through something like this?
If you look at history, the much bigger sweep, there's always an inherent conflict between the masses and the elites. Sometimes the masses prevail, sometimes the elites prevail.
Mm.
Now, always when the masses prevail, they're led by elites, members of the elite, renegade members of the elite. That has been true in the 1917 revolution in Russia, which was led by the intelligentsia and not by the masses, not by the proletariat, but by the intelligentsia, basically. That has been true in China, that's in Mao's time, and so on. So you have two types of elite, conforming elites, and then you have a long period of time where the elites establish self-serving institutions and basically hold the masses in contempt. And you have renegade members of the elite who have been rejected by the elite, mocked and ridiculed by the elite, or criticized by the elite, or put in prison by the elite. And these renegade members of the elite, they team up with the masses, they lead the masses, and there is an autocratic phase, authoritarian phase. These are forces of history. They're akin to forces of nature. You can go back as far as Assyria and Babylon. You'll find the same scheme, exactly the same scheme. Ancient Egypt, the same scheme. Periods where isolated, solipsistic elites, hermetically sealed from the masses, operate and use the masses as slaves or labor or consumers. Consumerism is a form of enslavement as well. So the masses are like this faceless mob that supports the habits of the elite. You have this, and then the masses rebel, and they're led by renegade members of the very same elite. And this ends up in huge destruction and devastation. And then the former elites take over again, and they reconstruct. And they create basically from scratch everything, and new institutions and so on. This has happened in the past 5,000 years, written history. So I don't see any way to oppose this. Each and every one of us on an individual basis should be, I think, brave enough, courageous enough to fight back, best of our ability. But if you're talking about a collective effort, this could be led only by countervailing elites. And what has happened now is that the renegade elites are way too powerful. In the October Revolution in Russia, the elites were intelligentsia. The intelligentsia was not very powerful. They didn't have money, they didn't have, And so 7 years later, they've been all abolished, they've been all executed, and the masses really took over. Same happened in China. in the United States, what is happening right now is that the renegade elites have succeeded to recruit a lot of money, a lot of technology, a lot of power. So it's going to be a much, much longer process. It's much more difficult to
mm,
reverse because it's not only a few renegades and then you can get rid of them somehow, put them in prison, for
mm,
example, as Biden
mm,
tried to do to Donald Trump. Yeah, put them in prison or something, or assassinate them. Happens a lot, but there are too many confluent. It's a collusion. There are too many confluent interests here, and these confluent interests are part and parcel, an integral part of the very ethos of capitalism. For example, you cannot attack Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley is capitalism. So these renegade elites, they are, they bear the torch of capitalism. They are the new face of capitalism. So if you want to get rid of these elites and supplant them or replace them with new elites, you would need actually to get rid of capitalism, which is exactly what Bernie Sanders is doing.
mm,
It's exactly the message of Bernie Sanders. Sanders says, look where capitalism has brought us. We need to get rid of the whole edifice, you know?
mm,
And so maybe one day America would become Sweden, essentially a socialist country who likes to delude itself that it is capitalist. So maybe come Sweden one day, and then you'll have a new group of elites, and they will rule, and they will hold the masses in contempt, and they will ignore the masses. They will sacrifice the interests of the masses. The labor force will suffer, and then there will be another rebellion, and renegade members of the elite will take over, and their name will not be Trump, it will be Schmump. It doesn't matter. It's the same story over and over and
mm.
over again, and there's very little you can do about it, in my view.
Sam, a final question. Um, do you feel that journalists, to be able to cope with this, need to have a better understanding of the psychology behind it? Do you feel that perhaps we should be looking at some sort of handbook for journalists to be able to communicate in ways that communicate some of these things better? Or do you think we're doing all right?
I think you're doing all right. Journalists are sharp people.
Mm,
Journalists are very sharp. The profession attracts people who are uncannily able to penetrate the psychology of others, even
mm,
without any
mm,
formal education, you know. I found journalists to be among the best psychologists.
mm.
So
Interesting.
a journalist picks up on the narcissistic vibes of
Mm,
Donald Trump.
mm,
A
mm,
journalist picks up on the utter Mad Hatter insanity of Elon Musk.
mm,
Any journalist does. All journalists do. Only some of them think these are assets.
mm,
The,
mm,
the,
mm,
the debate is not about the mental health of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Everyone agrees, left, right, and center, that they are mad hatters. They are utterly demented. Only the far right and even the right, conservatives, religious people, and so on, they believe that these are assets. They believe that
mm,
they could leverage and harness this negative energy of insanity in order to get rid of the previous elites, the establishment, and the institutions that they've created. So they regard
mm,
insanity as an asset. When I'm online, for example, and I say Donald Trump is a narcissist, people say, yeah, that's why we elected him. Only a narcissist can cope with all this mess. And
But
only a psychopath can cope with Putin, you know?
journalists struggle using labels, like the narcissism label. Do you think we should use it more often?
Yes, of course. There's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with the
because
narcissism. Nothing wrong with
but,
narcissism label.
but
Maybe you shouldn't say narcissist because
yes.
narcissist is a clinical entity, but you could safely say narcissistic.
Oh, interesting you say that because you once told me that you can be sure, a person can be sure that they're victims of narcissistic abuse. If they are victims of narcissistic abuse, then that must happen from a narcissist, must be coming from a narcissist. So if what is happening to us as a society is narcissistic abuse, which does sound like it, perhaps psychopathic abuse, then we must be able to define the people delivering it as these personality disordered people, yes?
So you have thinkers like Ginger Coy, and Ginger Coy coined the phrase political narcissistic abuse, and she
Mm,
believes it's coming from narcissists, stands to reason. but you're
mm,
not qualified to diagnose. So
mm,
that's why I suggest to use narcissistic rather than narcissist. It has the same force, same power.
mm,
It's same capacity to elucidate and enlighten you and so on and so forth.
mm,
Only it's more accurate. There's no question, no debate anywhere among anyone that Trump is narcissistic. No
mm,
debate
mm,
about this.
mm,
Take,
mm,
for example, Elon Musk. Elon Musk claims to have autism spectrum disorder. He claims to have what used to be called Asperger's disorder. Like any true narcissist, he diagnosed himself. He didn't bother to go to any diagnostician. He diagnosed himself, the great authority on psychopathology. So Elon Musk diagnosed himself with Asperger's, and then everyone immediately picked it up, and now is known as an autistic person.
mm,
Anyone in the field would immediately tell you that there's no hint of autism spectrum disorder in Elon Musk's life, biography, behavior, speech acts, or whatever. There's no hint of this.
mm,
There's no
mm,
trace of it. The man has nothing to do with autism spectrum disorder. And yet people in the media call him an autist or someone with,
mm,
they repeat this lie. Self-serving lie, by the way, because what's the alternative? The alternative is to say, I'm a malignant narcissist.
mm,
That's not very, so he said, I'm not a malignant narcissist. I'm misunderstood because I'm autistic. I'm hurting people. I'm hurting people. I'm bullying people. I am humiliating people, but I'm doing all this because I'm autistic. I don't know any better. I am
mm,
not,
mm,
God forbid, a malignant narcissist who is doing this pleasurably, with pleasure. I'm not sadistic.
mm,
And I can tell you, perhaps I'm not an authority on autism spectrum disorder, but I'm definitely an authority on narcissism, pathological narcissism.
mm,
And I can tell you with full authority that Elon Musk is a malignant sadistic narcissist. End
mm,
of story. No hint of autism. Definitely
mm,
Donald Trump. Now, I was the first to suggest that Donald Trump has narcissistic personality disorder, but then I was joined by 100 of the leading psychiatrists in the United States. So this seems to be pretty safe, a pretty safe
mm,
case.
mm, mm,
Elon Musk is early days. I am among the first to suggest that he has simply malignant sadistic narcissism. The day will come a year from now that
mm,
hundreds of psychiatrists would agree with me. They would be saying the same.
mm,
But I don't think journalists should do that. A journalist may quote a psychologist or may
mm,
refer to a psychologist the way you're doing right now.
mm, mm,
But I don't
mm,
think
mm,
I don't think it's okay, ethical or otherwise, to presume to diagnose people when you don't
mm,
have
mm.
the least professional qualification to do so. Yeah.
No, that's helpful, Sam, and I understand that. The reason why I personally think the label is so important, or these labels can be important, is because along with them goes a whole structure of behaviors that one might not actually see. We could see somebody project, say, but we may not see the envy or the jealousy that they may also contain. We may not see that somebody might feel godlike. We may not detect those things. So these labels do seem to be quite important to our understanding of what's happening to us.
I encourage journalists to work hand in hand
Mm,
on a regular basis with
mm,
psychologists.
mm,
Every time something happens, pick up the phone, talk to a psychologist,
mm,
publish
mm,
the reaction.
mm,
So there are many instances where Donald Trump's virulent,
mm,
pernicious, insidious narcissism is on clear display, and any psychologist would tell you that.
mm,
So simply use a psychologist. It would also lend
mm,
credibility to your writing.
mm,
And similarly with Elon Musk's narcissism and other people's
mm.
psychopathy and so on. There's like hundreds of thousands of psychologists. They all would be delighted to be quoted and
Yes.
have 15 minutes of fame.
Mm,
And I think we should lend credibility to our writing by resorting
mm,
to professionals.
mm. Sam, I'm incredibly grateful for your time
Thank
in
you.
helping us understand this, but it does sound quite cataclysmic.
Well, it's a
Um,
phase. You know what? Let's end on
mm,
an optimistic note. It's a
mm,
phase. It's going to end with absolute certainty. It's going to end. Unfortunately, it's going to end with the self-destruction of the autocratic leader and
Mm,
the destruction of many people around the autocratic leader. See, for example, Vladimir Putin. Yeah. So it always ends this way. It's going to end, and it's going to be
mm,
followed by a more liberal, progressive, democratic phase. And it's going to be led by more benign elites, and institutions will be reestablished. The nations will heal.
mm,
Everything will be okay. That's an absolute certainty. The
mm,
problem is actually, I'm much more worried not about autocratic leaders or authoritarian leaders because they're transient phenomena. They
mm,
are symptoms of a malaise or a disease of the population that elects
mm,
them. Hitler was elected,
mm.
legally, lawfully elected
Absolutely.
4 times,
Absolutely.
voted into office four
Mm,
times. I
mm,
mean, so the problem is with the population, not with the leaders. What I'm really worried about, if you ask me what happens after Donald Trump is gone?
mm,
Is gone, Trumpism is dead in the water, and the shambles of the United States are out there ready for reconstruction, like after the Civil War and so on. I'm afraid that the new elites will be as insulated, as contemptuous, as detached, as disempathic as the elites that have led to the emergence of Donald Trump and the elites that have led to the emergence of Vladimir Putin, actually, and of Mao and of
mm.
Stalin, and you name it.
Is
So,
it, is this fundamentally then about the relationship between the personality disordered and the rest of us, and the inability of the rest of us to manage or perhaps even really understand this minority of people and cope with them? Is there any way that you can foresee that we may change that, or are we destined to have this cycle go on forever?
destined. And there was a guy by the name of Sander in
Mm,
1989. He came up with the concept of shared fantasy.
mm,
I expanded his work and applied it to pathological narcissism,
mm,
but he deserves credit, not me. And the shared fantasy is simply a paracosm. It's an alternative reality
mm,
where you're safe, your dreams may come true, there's hope. Um, you are not accountable because all responsibilities and all decision making has been relegated to the leader. So you don't feel accountable, you never feel guilty, you never feel
mm,
ashamed because you never make a single decision or a single choice. You feel safe. In short, it's very reminiscent of the womb. It's a womb-like situation. It's uterine. It's like a matrix. So you are babyfied. You're infantilized. The autocratic leader comes to you and says, listen, having to make decisions, having to make choices, having to bear responsibility, having to feel guilty, having to feel having to feel ashamed, having to make mistakes. Why do you need all this? Let me take it away from you. And you don't need to think. You entertain yourself, have fun, know that you're safe. This is very reminiscent of the embryo in a womb or the
mm,
newborn baby with a mother. This is the shared fantasy. It is overpowering. It is the ultimate solution in times of uncertainty, indeterminacy, in times where everything is shaking, when nothing is safe, nothing is certain, where the future appears to be dystopian and threatening, menacing. Then the shared fantasy has amazing power, a magnetic power. It's irresistible, becomes irresistible. And don't think that you and I are resistant to it,
mm.
because in many ways, we're also embedded in shared fantasies. Shared fantasy seems to be the organizing principle of modernity and postmodernity. Only there are shared fantasies which are vile and wicked and harmful to others and so on. Shared fantasies which are exclusionary and xenophobic and racist and misogynistic and homophobic, and you name it. You have these kind of shared fantasies. And you have shared fantasies that masquerade as benign, And I'm saying masquerade because anytime you divorce reality, it's a pathology. It's never benign. Communism was an example of a shared fantasy that appeared to be benign and has misled many intellectuals in the first decades of the USSR, yeah? Western intellectuals. So communism is such an example, but liberal democracy is another.
Mm.
Liberal democracy is a shared fantasy. It appears to be benign. I'm not quite sure. Democracy, for example, may be a seriously flawed idea, a really, really bad idea. One vote for one person. If we are truthful and objective about it, democracy always leads to devastation. Democracy has led to Adolf Hitler. Democracy has led to Donald Trump. Democracy leads to bad places with bad people. Maybe we should review it a bit more objectively. Maybe we should go back to a type of democracy where the voters have skin in the game. They have wealth, they're educated, they know the issues. They spend some time, obligatory time, to study, and so on. I mean, maybe we should redesign democracy. That we accept democracy as it is and defend it vociferously and vehemently is a sign of pathology.
Is there some hope, though, Sam? And this is my final question, but I'm getting such good answers I can't stop myself. But Hitler and Mussolini never got on. Germany in the Second World War never really engaged with the Japanese Empire, and perhaps those things may have undermined their ability to have won those wars. Autocrats don't get on with each other. Is there, for example, people are always talking about when Trump and Musk might have a fight. Is it inevitable that they will fight, that these things will fall apart and they're incapable of really managing relationships between each other?
Well, just historical correction, Hitler and Mussolini actually did get along very well. But it's true that Hitler and Japan did not get along. And Musk is not the equivalent of Trump. He's not as equipotent as Trump.
Mm.
Trump can eliminate Musk overnight in every possible way, by the way. Confiscatory. He could confiscate
Mm.
his wealth. There's a way,
Mm.
always, if you really want. If you really want to. If you're so inclined, he can destroy Musk overnight like this. Musk knows it.
Mm.
On the other hand, Musk is a useful idiot. Trump is using him as a battering ram to destroy the federal government, institutions, and establishments that may endanger his future regime, future dictatorial regime, for anyone who has any doubts.
Mm.
So Musk is useful. He's a tool. I wouldn't compare him to the relationship between Mussolini and Hitler. But autocrats, by and large, actually do get along very well.
Mm.
There was a period of collaboration between Hitler and Stalin. Hitler and Mussolini had a good relationship to the very end, to 1943, when Mussolini lost, for the first time, lost his regime, and Hitler sent forces with Skorzeny to kind of restore Mussolini. There was a collaboration between Japan and Germany to the extent that Germany declared war on the United States
Mm.
in the wake of Pearl Harbor, which it
Mm.
didn't have to do. It was very stupid as well.
Mm.
And so on and so forth. Exactly as liberal democracies flock together and the leaders of liberal democracies collaborate, and the same applies to the autocratic clubs or the authoritarian clubs. I would beg to differ. I think they actually
Mm.
work well together. They're not
Well,
efficacious. Perhaps that's what you mean.
mm.
They're not efficacious in the
Mm.
sense that sooner or later everything falls apart. They never succeed. It's like
Mm.
at the end, they're total losers. All autocratic leaders, not a single exception, are losers, either because they have brought destruction and devastation on their own domain,
Mm.
or because they could have done a hell of a lot better. So
Mm.
I
Mm.
mentioned Elon Musk, for example. If you read the biography by Isaacson, it's so clear that Elon Musk's totally unnecessary and often erroneous interventions, pretending to be a genius, have actually obstructed the development of the products. The engineers had to cope with his idiocy.
Mm. Mm,
blatant idiocy. The man is an idiot, by the way, in my view.
mm,
And I'm talking psychologically. I think he's a stupid man. But they had to cope with this, and this retarded the process of development and so on. So Elon Musk has accomplished things, but he could have accomplished a hell of a lot more had he not been a narcissist or
mm,
or a sadist, you know.
mm.
So either way, they end badly. Either
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
And mark my words, I'll make a prediction. You know, only fools make predictions, according to the Talmud. And I've been known to be a fool time and again. Uh, Elon Musk will end his life penniless.
Mm,
I hope not homeless. I I believe that he will not be homeless, but he will be penniless. Mark my
mm.
word. It sounds bizarre, but let's see if we're both alive in 10 years' time. In 10 years' time, in a homeless shelter. Elon Musk is on the way to utter self-immolation and self-implosion.
Mm,
Like all narcissists and psychopaths.
mm,
No exception.
mm. Um, Sam, I'm incredibly grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having
Um,
me.
um, and I'll stop recording now then, yes?
So will I. But we need to talk for a minute or two.
Yeah.